podcast was really where the shift was going for people who were news junkies. So if you were addicted to news, you started listening to it on podcasts because the trust in traditional media was just declining so much. I'm not sure if I totally agree in terms of like reach, just because like now programmatically, if you can activate on podcasts at scale, you can use the same first party data targeting that you're using in digital, and you can obtain the same scale if you're willing. One data point that's interesting is that about 30% of American media time is spent consuming audio, but only 8% of budgets. Another thing that's cool about podcasting is it's on the open internet, so that means we can access it and we can provide the advertisers with that level of transparency that they couldn't get in a walled garden. And I think the ability to do contextual targeting is maybe even more exciting than the brand safety and brand suitability, though they kind of go hand in hand. And so we make it really easy for you to make like contextual rules. And I do think that those two things are really important, because before contextual data, all they had was genre, and genre is just not that informative.
Hi, Tamara.
Hi, Ibrahim.
Welcome to Below the Fold. Welcome to the #1 marketing and advertising podcast in the MENA region.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for making some time. I know that you're here on a short stay, and you've been pretty busy for the past few days. You've come here all the way from Manhattan, and this is your first time in the UAE. Is it your first time in the Middle East or in the Gulf region?
It is, yes.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah.
Have you thought ever about visiting this part of the world?
Yes. When my husband, when he was a kid, his father worked in the oil business, and so he actually lived in Abu Dhabi for a year when he was a child. And so he always speaks so fondly of the region and wanting to come back. Obviously, that was like 20 years ago. So he came with me this time, and he's like, oh my gosh, I haven't seen any of this either. So I've definitely wanted to have a reason to visit. And in fact, when I met Adel and Lemia last year, they were like, next year, like, you'll come to Dubai. And so I wrote in January in my calendar, Dubai Q4. And
nice.
Here we are.
Here we are. And I'm I guess lucky, to have you here. And I'm really excited about the product that you have founded. But before we get to that, why don't you give the listeners and the viewers a little bit of background about yourself? What did you study, and then how did you get to found this product?
Absolutely. Thank you. And I want to also thank the Dubai Press Club for having me out here. They brought me out and are extremely supportive of our company and the work that we're doing in the region. It's really cool. So like you said, I'm Tamara. I am living in New York right now. I was born in the Ukraine. When I was 5, I moved to San Diego, and my passion was always like the brain and learning about the brain. So in school, I studied computational neuroscience and then machine learning, and then I got my PhD in human-centered AI. So I'm really passionate about AI and machine learning and using it to overcome biases through data. That's like my whole kind of thesis. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I went to undergrad in San Diego, so it was amazing. That's where I met my husband and the co-founder of Barometer. That's also where we did the hackathon at which
Beautiful.
Barometer was founded.
Where was the hackathon? Was it at university?
Yeah, it was a university hackathon founded by this woman named Amber Brandner.
Right.
And it was through Singularity.
Okay.
They're like it's like a foundation in the Bay Area for what happens when the machine and the man merge.
Right.
And so it's like for that future state. And I don't really know what that had to do with our idea, but we ended up winning this hackathon. And that's how the idea for Barometer started getting incubated in 2017.
Right. And what was the hackathon about? Was it that?
It was called Absolute Sum. And the idea was that the sum is greater than the parts. Mm-hmm. And so the idea was like, it was honestly focused on Web3 and on crypto. And so the original implementation of Barometer was focused on validating news about crypto, so that we could say, like, is this a scam, or is this like really sensational, or is this just like some information? Because we thought that crypto was cool, but it was kind of being really hyped up with the scams.
There was a lot of hype, a lot of speculation,
Yes.
lots of content that may not have been always, I guess, reliable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
that's kind of how it started, and that's how we found the news.
Yeah.
And then eventually podcasting.
And if you don't mind, when was that? Which year was that?
Yeah, so I was trying to remember. I think it was 2018 actually that
Okay.
the hackathon was.
Yeah.
And then we incorporated the company in 2019. And so in that in between, we had won some prize money, like just a couple $1,000s. And so we were just like working on it while we were in college, building the machine learning models and training them on news data at first
Yeah.
because we could buy it. And then we realized a couple of things. Podcast was really where the shift was going for people who were news junkies. So if you were addicted to news, you started listening to it on podcasts because the trust in traditional media was just declining so much.
Yeah.
And so the other cool thing about podcasts is they're syndicated via RSS. And so RSS is on the open internet and anybody can get the audio file. And if you have the money, you can transcribe it. So that was kind of why we started getting interested in podcasts.
Interesting. Why don't you tell me a little bit about the product, right? Tell me a little bit about Barometer. Like, consider me a planner, a marketing planner or a media planner
Yes.
or an advertising executive, right?
It's like double verify, but it works.
Okay.
That's our pitch.
All right. That sums it up.
And it works for podcasts.
I should probably bring the double verify guys, get them on the podcast, explain the product, and then I'll just add it works and just I'll say this is Barometer.
Exactly. But all jokes aside,
Yeah.
Barometer enables advertiser confidence through transparency and facilitating choice.
Right.
What our AI does is listen to all the podcasts
Yeah.
and analyzes them based on industry standard taxonomies that planners use when they're making their plans. So, for
Okay.
example, if you're like a bank, you're required to have a policy about profanity and guns and drugs and all of these different topics.
Yeah.
And it's usually somebody's job to map your standards into double verify or some of these tools.
Yeah.
And then they will apply that standard to whatever media you're trying to buy. So say it's TV, you say, I don't want profanity, so they don't run you on the TV shows that have profanity. There was nothing like that in podcasting. And so one of the things that we observed was people bought podcasting in a special way. They would buy like one episode of a show because somebody had to listen to it. And what we found was there was really no way to get scale. And it was really hard to convince people to get more shows or do something like a run of network just because they didn't have time to
Right.
listen to the content.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing about podcasts. I feel like one of the selling points of podcasts is the depth of the content, right, that takes place in a podcast conversation and the level of affinity it can create between the content and the brand, which is a challenge to measure today, right? Which is being a challenge for podcasters to really show to advertisers, right? To be
Yeah.
able to sell their podcast. Because let's be honest, in terms of reach, it's not as, I guess, as efficient as, other mass media, right? So you need something to help justify that affinity, right? That depth that you're able to achieve with podcasts.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting like supposition. I'm not sure if I totally agree in terms of like reach, just because like now programmatically, if you can activate on podcasts at scale, you can use the same first party data targeting that you're using in digital, and you can obtain the same scale if you're willing. But that's where it starts interacting with other challenges like targeting and like measurement, like you're
Yeah.
saying. So I think it's a really interesting challenge. And
Yeah.
I do think that one data point that's interesting is that about 30% of American media time is spent consuming audio, but only 8% of budgets.
Maybe I was referring to the region here, but I would guess in markets, in maybe more developed markets, the reach is there, right?
It's definitely like growing. I would say it's unique reach. So I think that's kind of one of the ways that we talk about it as well, is it's like it's a different demographic. It's a younger demographic. It's a richer demographic. It's people who don't have cable. So those are some of the different properties. But to your point, it definitely varies by region. Yeah.
Yeah. So you were saying in the absence of the reach in a certain market, that's when the affinity and the brand suitability, and I want you to develop a little bit more about that or around that, comes in, right? Becomes a little bit more valuable, becomes a better selling point, right?
Totally. Yeah, it's really a way to qualify the content more because podcasting is premium content. It's not the same thing as UGC. And I think that's like a really important distinction to make. Sometimes there's podcasts on YouTube. Like this podcast might be on YouTube, but that's not the same as like a cat video on YouTube or some like trash content on TikTok. It's a very unique premium content environment. And so it requires a very unique treatment. And another thing that's cool about podcasting is it's on the open internet. So that means we can access it and we can provide the advertisers with that level of transparency that they couldn't get in a walled garden like TikTok. So brand suitability data helps qualify the content for inclusion on the buy. And so we see ourselves as like one of the things that could get in the way. But the way that we approach this problem, and it's a little bit special, we'll talk about it more, but we help release that block so that more inventory can be included.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah, because without that understanding of or measuring the nicheness, I guess, of a podcast, in the eyes of the advertiser, it's just a plain audience.
Exactly. And there's so many different like data points that you can provide to the brand, and different brands care about different things. So from the brand safety and brand suitability perspective, we can provide like a risk profile. Mm-hmm. How high or low or medium risk is this episode regarding profanity, adult content, talking about crime, talking about drugs? Each of these is separate because the brand might have a totally unique policy on one subject versus another, and we might encourage them in podcasts to think about like, if I'm going to buy comedy, maybe I should be okay with some profanity because it's comedy. Or if I'm going to buy true crime, maybe I should be okay with crime because it's true crime. It seems like basic, but because these buyers are used to planning and buying in other channels, they might not have those same heuristics, and so it takes time. But to your other point, the other amazing thing about podcasts is the niche contexts. You can have these amazing experts that connect with really expert audiences and expert guests. And I think the ability to do contextual targeting is maybe even more exciting than the brand safety and brand suitability, though they kind of go hand in hand. And so we make it really easy for you to make like contextual rules. And I do think that those two things are really important because before contextual data, all they had was genre. Mm-hmm. And genre is just not that informative.
Right. Could you perhaps walk me through an example of an advertiser that could leverage your product or that has leveraged your product in the past, whereby you have, delivered to him an understanding about the brand suitability of a particular podcast for his like advertiser campaign?
Yeah, 100%. So, a case study, I can't name the client, sure, but it's a large telecom company, and they used to only buy a handful of shows. They had to have a very thorough vetting process. It would take them 6 months to evaluate a show. People had to listen to episodes of it, and then they had like a whole spreadsheet, and it was crazy.
I was literally going to ask you about the turnaround time, so please go ahead.
This is so nuts.
Which is important, yeah.
It is, because the media plan, the timeline is so important. If you can't get it approved in time, it's not going to run. And so, that can create huge problems for publishers. So what they were able to do with Barometer is import their list. Barometer already tracks over 50,000 podcasts continuously, so there was no need to wait. They literally uploaded their list. It loaded into a dashboard, and then they were able to put on their filters. So they went through and they had their own standards. They were like, for adult, I want medium risk or low risk or high risk for each standard. And then at the end, they were able to filter an entire run of network for not one, not two, but like 5 different partners on different ad servers, each with their own inclusion list. And then they were able to push those as PMPs and activate on those.
Wow, impressive.
And what's even cooler is usually these inclusion lists are set it and forget it. Right. But content changes all the time and we're keeping up with it. And there were certain shows that they had previously excluded that they were then able to include back in. So I'm talking about a scale of going from like 100 podcasts to 10,000 podcasts. It's such a huge jump, and there would be no way for them to do it with AI, and they literally can do it instantly, self-service in the platform, one-click export, send it to the publisher.
Yeah.
But what's even cooler now is we're the first pre-bid vendor to be integrated into the trade desk to service podcasts.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I was just literally going to. You're ahead of the curve the entire time. You're just one question ahead of me. I was gonna ask you about that integration, because you did say that this particular advertiser identified this list of podcasts and then activated them, right?
Yeah.
And so there must have been some form of integration, right, with I guess a programmatic tool or a trade desk.
Yeah, so what's cool is in the past, what you had to do like sucked. You had to go into Barometer, make your list, export it.
Which is honestly still valuable. Sorry to
Yes.
interrupt you, but it's
Yes.
still very good. Like,
Totally
I would
agree.
definitely buy into that just to understand what podcasts work better.
I totally agree, and it's still amazing, and it's definitely the status quo for most publishers, most advertisers, and most DSPs. So if you're going to use DV360 or Yahoo, that is the status quo, and that's why we invented a monitoring product so that we could tell you, you know what shows you ran on, but you don't know which episodes. And so we could tell you which episodes you ran on and whether those episodes met your standard. What's cool about the trade desk integration is you don't have to do the export step, and then the publisher doesn't have to set up the PMP for you. And there's sometimes manual error that could happen where you accidentally run on a show that you didn't mean to. It's very rarely intentional, but things happen. We're human. But in the trade desk integration, you could put in your same filters that you would have put in Barometer. Now you could just do it in the trade desk, and then you could just press go, and you won't run on a show that doesn't meet your standards. And you could even do it at the episode level, where you literally won't run on the episode unless it met your standards first. So that's kind of the big change.
Cool. So not only this advertiser has been able to scale his podcast campaign to run across a bigger audience, I suppose, that is a good match, right, for his product or campaign. But also, was there any impact on engagement rate, perhaps, as opposed to maybe previous broad podcast campaigns? Or do you have any historical, I guess, learnings? You don't have to name the advertiser, but have you seen any uplift potentially for advertisers that have, I guess, worked with you?
Yeah.
And then, found podcasts that are suitable, and then, after engaging with these podcasts, they've seen an uplift in performance.
Certainly. I think the best example is Rocket Money, and I'm allowed to name them because they've publicly talked about this. So podcast was always one of their top performing channels, but they had a incident where they ran on an episode and they maybe ran like under 100 impressions, like very, very, very few impressions, and the episode wasn't suitable, and their CEO heard it.
Oh, no.
And so he was like, I don't care if it's our best performing podcast. Pull the whole channel. And they were like, we don't care if it's the best performing marketing channel of our whole media mix. Yeah. And so it really took them a while to convince them to say, no, we have to have a process now. And so they started having a process, and their process started out being really manual. And with the amount that they were spending, it was really hard for them to spend that much money on the limited number of shows. And so when they started working with us, we were able to help them scale their policy to include, obviously, like literally thousands and thousands of more shows that they can continuously keep up with. And the impact was they over 10x their spend.
Wow, okay.
They more than doubled their ROAS.
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy the impact that you're able to have when you can actually have the scale required to make the impact and layer on the targeting. Because targeting, there's so many different things, right? There's Barometer, obviously. I see us as like the gate. But then what about audience? What about the IP or the email address or whatever first party data they're using to target their audience? You have to make sure your segment's big enough so that whatever first party data they're going to layer on, it'll clear. There's so many of these little considerations that scale has become so much more important than it was in the past. And it's different also in the States compared to here, because here you're programmatic first. There, performance marketers outspent brands until this year.
Yeah.
So it's a really big change.
When you say layering first-party data, you mean on programmatic, through programmatic?
Yeah.
Through Trade Desk?
Mm-hmm. Or any DSP partner.
And a DSP partner, right, after you've I guess, listed out your podcasts.
Exactly.
Interesting. And would you say there are any competitors to Barometer out there?
I would say there's analogs.
Yeah.
So like Double Verify and Integral Ad Sciences, Zephyr in other channels.
Yeah.
In podcasting, there really haven't been that many players. There used to be a company called Sounder. It got acquired by iHeart. iHeart owned the majority of it anyway. And so because they're owned by an audio publisher, other audio publishers are reluctant to trust them, and advertisers feel like they're grading their own homework. So their focus is more about vertical integration within a specific ad server. Our focus is more on horizontal integration across ad servers and providing that consistency. But I hope that all audio publishers that are especially platforms have some kind of an internal process, because if you don't work with us and you have like a run of network or something, I can't tell you the number of times I've found like pornography or like crazy stuff in these networks, and you'd be surprised at the brands that are running on that type of content.
Yeah. There's I do want us to talk a little bit more about that entire, I guess, measurement space, right? When it comes to podcasts, and like where do you fit in versus I guess the industry, right? Or maybe other measurement tools. But
yeah,
I also want to ask you, do you offer your service on other channels as well besides podcasts?
Yeah, we do. So we are fully omnichannel. We are. Somebody at the trade desk once told me that value has to do with the service that you're providing, but also the rarity of that service. So right now we're the only ones that are doing the podcast, which is super exciting.
Yeah.
But our thesis is about premium produced media, and we have two main focuses: diverse voices and the news. These two content areas have historically been failed by brand safety solutions because they were keyword based and there were certain like systemic biases. But with Barometer, you can actually activate on the news and on diverse voices in a much more accurate way. So the way that that's growing in omnichannel is starting out with digital news channels from premium news providers. What we found is shocking. The players like Double Verify, they block over 50% of the revenues programmatically to some of these news providers. And I'm talking about like the most reputable news providers in the world. I'm not talking about like The Onion or like spammy news tabloids. And seeing that problem and the consequences of that on society is one of our biggest kind of drivers. Is ad-supported news creates an informed society. And so that's our first step outside of podcasting. And our trade desk integration is fully omnichannel, but we highly recommend that you start with only podcasting for now.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely super I guess interested in the podcasting element or measurement element. But I am also intrigued about the non-podcasting stuff.
Yes.
And if you don't mind, if I can also ask you, how would then Barometer work differently from DV when, let's say, you're scanning a website or one of these digital news channels? Because to be fair, I would assume that they cover a broad number of topics, right? And there will be some topics that may not be appropriate, right, for brands.
Totally.
So I guess perhaps Barometer is able to be a little bit more granular in how you scan the data, how you analyze the data.
Exactly. Yeah, so the biggest, the process is for audio, we get the audio file and then we transcribe it. So our input is actually text. And that's what makes it easy for us to go onto display or another context because it's already transcribed. So the first step is what we call presence of, where we're looking for possible discussions of something that might be relevant. I like to say that that's where other vendors stop, is they think they found a mention of shooting. Cool, it's blocked. We realize that you're shooting a movie, not a gun, or a basketball, or something different. So in the second step, we're looking at like, what are you saying around that mention? And is it a crime? Are we at a sports game? What do we know? And once we kind of layer that on, that's not enough. Because there's tons of content, for example, that talk about murder, or that talk about like adult subjects. But some of that is educational. Some of that is true crime that is very dramatic and kind of negative and sad and scary. Some of it is true crime that's like, yay, the murder was so cool. Obviously, there's huge differences there for advertisers. And in the past, all they could do is say, okay, I guess no true crime. Now they can go in and they can say, which true crime is talking about the crime in an exciting way and which true crime is sad about the crime. And they can refine that. And so the granularity is exactly what we're seeking to bring. not only do we provide the episode level and the show level responses, but we provide all of these different categories. So, for example, like political issues, you might only care about certain political issues and not others. We allow you to fine tune exactly your policies about different issues to maximize how much content you can include.
Right. And I think also that probably enabled the publishers, right, to be to scale, right, to be able to sell more, right, specific content as opposed to the entire show.
Exactly. Yeah. And of course, if you're a publisher, you want to sell. Publishers are always like, they were buying content before. Why do they need you now? Yeah. We don't want them to stop buying everything. And my pitch to them is always, they buy 1% now. Don't you want them to increase their share of their media spend onto your content? And this is one of the ways that we can help them do that. So publishers love it from the point of view of every publisher that we've worked with has made 100x their Barometer subscription. The process is they have a goal. They have their catalog of advertisers. Some of them only buy 2 shows. They want them to buy a run of network. That's our like biggest thing that we do is help people run a run of network. But from there, that's really how you start building that relationship and that virtuous cycle of trust. And once you build that, it just keeps going. So yeah, the publishers really, we thought, it's funny, we thought when we first built this product that it was for advertisers only. And then what we realized was that like Double Verify and Integral Ad Sciences, for example, show different data to publishers and advertisers. So our first insight was, what if we just showed everybody the same information? And so that's what we do.
Right. Yeah. Cool. I mean, I still need to, I guess, wrap my head around the other measurement tools. Right?
Yes.
And I would be interested to see how they are working with publishers. But from what I can hear from you, is that you're helping out publishers. You're not just helping out advertisers.
Yeah, it's definitely a fine line. And I also feel like there's different types of measurement. So like for brand safety measurement, like usually we're like not the friends of the publishers. But in this case, I feel like it's a good example. And I'm sure others could do the same thing. But like take YouTube, for example. If you're a publisher and you post content on YouTube, sometimes they might take it down. Publishers actually use Barometer to fight YouTube and say, no, this is an independent third party. They said this is suitable. I think this is suitable. Put it back.
Right.
So there's many different kind of ways. And I would say like the other type of measurement is more focused on like we measure what the content is saying, but then you can also measure like, so what happened after. So that's always an angle where like it's known that like profanity converts.
Yeah.
True crime converts.
Right.
And so it's about kind of considering the trade-offs there. We don't do anything in terms of attribution. Like we don't have an attribution measurement product, but we work agnostically with the leading like pixel-based providers in the space. Like for example, Claritas. And so if you are a buyer and you want to use a pixel, you can actually use the Claritas pixel to pixel your campaign. So it'll pixel your ad, and then we know every episode that you ran on, and we provide that data about the suitability of those episodes. But then you can also pixel end conversion events on your website, like somebody clicking on a certain button or filling out a survey or whatever it is that you care about. And then what you can do is actually say, okay, this suitable episode led to a conversion. Or this podcast that I thought wasn't my standard actually converted the best.
Right.
And that allows you to really take that conversation back to the client and say, you know, seems like our audience is engaging with the show.
Yeah.
And I always say, don't let your biases get in the way of your performance.
Yeah.
Let the data tell you where your audience is.
Yeah, yeah. There must be a proper pixel setup, right? A proper segmentation with the pixel. You can't use, obviously, you'll need to segment the tracking, right, to be able to track the different episodes or that have different brand suitability.
No, you can just use the same pixel. It's amazing because we pixel the campaign. So we pixel the ad, and then anywhere the ad gets called, we get the macros.
Okay, so you use the macros basically, right,
yeah,
to get the segmentation.
Exactly.
As to what episode are converting.
Yeah, and so we get like a report, and the report says like this ID for the episode, this ID for the show, this number of impressions. We purposely don't see any of the data about the performance because we're fully GDPR compliant. So our partner Claritas is focused on the attribution service. And then they put it together for the client in their dashboard. We report like, good job, you got 99% alignment on your suitability standards. These were the main contexts that you ran in. And then we can layer on the, okay, now how did each of these contexts perform?
Fantastic. You basically close the loop. You're able to link, I guess, bottom lines or return back to brand suitability.
Exactly. And what's awesome is for publishers, usually they don't see this data about what converted and how did it perform. But with our monitoring solution, many publishers work it in as something that they provide for the campaign, and then they also get to see the data.
Yeah,
So
and
it helps.
they get to use it in front of advertisers, right? Because they struggle today to prove that their shows actually, convert.
This is something so true. We totally didn't realize. We thought that advertisers and publishers had totally different use cases. What we realized is it's agencies and publishers versus brands.
Yeah.
And so agencies and
Nice.
publishers have the same use case. They're both trying to evaluate the content for suitability. They're both trying to vet it and validate it. And for publishers, like, if the publisher doesn't know what they're selling, how can they sell it? So it's definitely important.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, very exciting stuff. Let's talk a little bit about the region here. Tell me a little bit about what you've seen so far, right? How do you feel I guess the agencies that you've met, the advertisers that you've met are faring when it comes to, I guess, podcast measurement, their knowledge and their readiness, I guess, to use a platform like Barometer.
Yeah, I feel like one of the cool things that I've noticed about the region is you guys are programmatic first. So, and there's a lot of large brands that are interested in podcasting that have top of funnel KPIs rather than performance oriented brands with more bottom of funnel KPIs. And I think that really puts you at an advantage from the point of view of like integrating and buying in the more digital like way. And so I think that's been one of the very exciting things in the agencies that we've talked to. We've heard very similar things that we hear from our holding company partners in the States. We need a certain amount of scale. We need certain assurances, and we need to be able to use certain types of targeting that are available in our DSP partners. And so to be able to tell an agency that like now it's fully integrated as a pre-bid partner in Trade Desk and you don't have to send us an IO and you don't have to worry about the invoice, it's all going to get done for you in the clearinghouse. The level of like stress and manual labor that takes off is so massive. I would say one other interesting like roadblock that happens that we can't solve for is creative. Generating audio creative seems to be, even if they can target the right audience and they can do all of their measurement, that could sometimes be a sticking point. But one of the big reasons that we're here is we have this partnership with Next Broadcast Media, and they're really amazing, and they work with a lot of advertisers in programmatic capacity to serve them PMPs that are or programmatic guaranteed deals as well that meet whatever the requirements that they have. And so it's been really cool working with them because they just launched a tool that helps you generate the ads.
Yeah.
And so I think that barrier to entry is only going to get lower. And the biggest barrier typically has been measurement, like attribution measurement or whatever the top of funnel KPIs are would be like with a brand lift study, and brand safety. So those are kind of the two pieces that we're trying to solve while others, including Next Broadcast Media, are helping to overcome some of the other creative hurdles.
Right, but for measurement, for attribution measurement, you mentioned the pixel, right? That could be a solve, perhaps.
It is. One of the interesting challenges is the holding company brands tend to be more regulated. And so because of all of the regulation about like pixels and like cookies and stuff, a lot of banks, for example, can't pixel their websites anymore. So that's been a challenge. But there's so many other methods. Like there's like Bluetooth beacons you could put in your storefronts. There's UID2 that you could use to look at email addresses. So the options are getting much better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then you're at par with other channels, right?
Exactly. That's been the idea. Is like my whole thing is like audio is not special. Let's not pretend it's anything too crazy, and let's keep it more simple, like digital channels.
Right, right. And potentially, would you say that there may be a need for an educational element for advertisers?
Yes. That's the biggest piece of feedback that we hear is like, what do we need to get this over the line? A lot of the times the agencies have kind of come around and they understand, like they see it converting, they get it, but they need help educating their clients about it. And I think there's a lot that can be done. One of the biggest missed opportunities is that audio isn't in mixed media models. So even at the early planning stages, sometimes it's just excluded or it's like bolted on at the end. But one of the most exciting things I heard today was a major agency programmatic lead saying, we think some of our brands should be audio first. And what's really cool is some of the data about the incrementality of omnichannel. If you're also adding audio, Audio makes your social campaigns perform much better. They allow you incremental reach to certain audiences that you couldn't reach in more traditional channels. So there's so many different ways to position the value add of audio, but it does require education all the way to the level of the client.
Fantastic. And speaking of education and support, let's wrap up with this. Where can the audience reach you?
Please reach out to me via email, tamara@thebarometer.co, and we'll leave the details in the show notes as well. If you're interested in learning more, you can Google us at our website, thebarometer.co, and listen to the podcasts. We've done some really good podcasts about the education side and speaking about how it works, how it's worked with different partners, even case studies. So we'd love to meet you.
Cool. That was amazing and super fresh. Thanks so much, Tamara.
Thank you so much, Ibrahim.
Thank you.